Welcome back to Introduction into Sociology. We're going to be going over Chapter 6, which is deviance. Now let's move forward. Our material defines deviance as a behavior, trait, or belief that departs from the norm and generates a negative reaction in a particular group. That does not mean that when I say deviance or any other sociologist says deviance, that we're judging and we're specifically thinking of it as deviant. We're looking at it as the particular groups that see it that way. So again, when you go in as a sociologist, go in with clear thoughts and just be looking much like an outsider does and exploring deeper that way, not coming in with your own personal opinion. Now, deviance, this can be as extreme, considered as extreme as robbing someone, to going to the point of going into a gas station with no shirt on, and in most places, no shirt, no shoes is a rule. You won't be served, you're supposed to leave. But think about if you go to a gas station at the beach with a bikini top on. That's not considered deviant. So deviant depends on who you're around, where you are. Remember all those questions and settings. Think of it that way. Many cultures have different things that they view as deviant and how they handle it. Some could be leaving a religion, tattoos, a younger person looking into the eyes of an elder, protesting, women wearing pants, not following the HOA rules, homosexuality, just to name a few. How do different cultures respond? Well, people can be isolated from communities, groups, family. They can be fined, they can be jailed, they can be spoken about. Their friends and family can also face those punishments. What looks like the norm in one place and may be accepted in another or even expected may be considered a huge act of deviance. Let's take, for example, the pictures below with the nose rings. Well, in one culture, it's expected and it's encouraged. It's part of the culture there. Here, in some groups and places, a nose ring is accepted. But in some places, you'll be going to work and they'll ask you before you start, you'll need to take out your nose ring to work here. So again, there's different perspectives on just one simple thing, such as a nose ring. Now, Emil Durkheim came up with the idea of the function of deviance for society. He came up with a couple of functions to explore. First, he said deviance can help a society clarify its moral boundaries. Function of deviance is to promote social cohesion, one of functionalism, valued ideas. And he said people can be brought together as a community in the face of crime or violations. So an example you're going to see below is when women fought for the right to vote. Women were protesting, and they were known as deviant. Many were arrested or condemned. Even their families sort of exiled them, or they were punished during that time period. Their families also may have said, you can't do this. But there were several women that went out and accepted the protests. They were even arrested. And through that process, because they formed a group cohesion, even though it was considered a deviance and a violation, because they formed that group cohesion, they were able to, after many years, because it didn't happen right away, they were able to get the right to vote. Travis Hershey's social control theory hypothesis is that the stronger one's social bonds to family and religious, civic, and other groups, the less likely one is to commit crime. Think of it this way. If you're very devoted to your community and you have a very strong bond to it, you have a strong bond to maybe some of the civic groups, you're not likely going to go out and maybe cause vandalism, or you're not going to, if you have a very strong bond to your religious group, There's the expectations that you would not do things that are considered not the norm or deviant with your religious group. So that strong commitment. If you've been very committed to your family, you have a very, very strong social bond to your family, there can be some guilt if you were to do things that the family considers deviant behavior, such as sneaking out at night, or maybe you're just dressing a different way. This one, Robert Merton came up with the idea of structural strain theory. So in structural strain theory, think we're the American dream. We've all been told that when we're younger, you can have everything, you'll be super successful, you'll have this amazing wealth. What do little kids say when you ask them what they're going to be when they're younger? They're going to be famous. They're going to be very wealthy. They're going to either be, they could be a basketball player, a singer. They're going to be a doctor. They're going to have all of these fancy cars. They're going to have a penthouse in New York or over the ocean, things like that. And we're told that we can achieve those. But then when people are starting to realize that that's out of my realm, but I still want that because I've been told that that's out there. He's saying that people will go and have deviant behaviors. Maybe they're going to go steal a car, that really nice car. Or maybe they're upset that people have that stuff. So they're going to do some property damage to it. He notes that people are upset that they can't have that American dream and they'll either do whatever it takes to get it, even though it can be deviant behavior, or they will just be very upset themselves. This is not just your burglary, your break-ins, your damage. This can also happen in crimes where people were using that white-collar crime to get ahead. That's deviant behavior because they want the more. They see people with the more capitalism, more opportunities. And so maybe they're dealing with stocks and sharing the information before it goes on the market and telling people to buy. It can happen in any setting, so it doesn't have to be, again, we don't want it labeled to certain cultures or certain groups of people. We don't want stereotypes. It can happen anywhere. It's those that always see it's greener on the other side. So I want that. And we're told you should be able to get that. But deviance is saying, how can we do that? It looks impossible for me, so what do I need to do? In relationships, there are many types of deviance. One that we're seeing more of is cyberbullying, trolls, and online deviance. For example, cyberbullying, if you make a comment or you're putting something up on the internet and then people start following you and making negative comments, that could be trolls. Cyberbullying, they could start saying negative things about you. They could send you messages that say horrible things about you or tell you that they send you pictures of yourself. There was a time where some of the high school students were getting pictures of themselves that were particularly shared with one person that was spread around to several, and they were being bullied by it. People have been threatened by material. Once it's online, it's hard to get rid of, and a lot of these cyber bullies take advantage of that. They also can say things like, I hope you mess up. I hope you, they can say horrible things like, you shouldn't be here anymore. All these horrible things. Online deviants can do anything that can be from also hacking. That can be a form of online deviance. Someone breaks in, gets your banking information, your credit card information. So what we're seeing more of is with the internet access, there has been a new form of deviance going on. It can be what people think of as silly middle school deviants, which can be very, very dangerous to other individuals. But there can also be things such as doing credit cards and stealing your bank information. So we have to look at both. One of the things that is noted is a lot of this is now being handled by things such as the SBI, your State Bureau of Investigation, your Federal Bureau of Investigation. It can be reported to local authorities, and they're taking this a lot more seriously. I'm going to go over a few theories, and I just want you to think about it as a overall story of someone who's maybe a teenager in high school. Okay, so this person has made friends with a new group of people. People would consider them the deviant peers, the peers that are doing things not appropriate. Maybe they're dressing, a way that's sort of people question. Maybe they've been known to go out and misbehave in the area and do things that are dangerous or inappropriate to what people think. So, first off, that would be considered differential association theory. So that's when you're going to be going out with the people you associate, then you're going to start having that behavior with those people you associate. So if they have deviant behavior, then he's saying that you're going to start having that deviant behavior as well. So if you have been labeled by someone, in this situation, we'll say it was a teacher, and she labeled you a troublemaker after seeing you starting to act a certain way, then you're going to start having that label, the troublemaker, and you're going to start seeing yourself as that, start acting that way. It's a way of accepting that label, and you start using it in your actions. So maybe she ended up catching you with that first action, which was she caught you in the bathroom smoking pot with these new friends that you were associating with, because remember, he was saying you were going to go along with it. And of course, she gave you that label, which was the labeling theory, where she gave you that label. But that first label came from when she caught you doing that. So you started going along with it. That first incident where she caught you in the bathroom smoking pot at the high school was whenever you started recognizing that as your label. That was that first start where you started accepting it as your identity and going forward. The next is the second action that's going to happen from it. So when you're labeled with that, your second action, we'd be going out maybe with those friends, and the next stop is, drinking with driving or breaking into cars. That's your secondary defiance. So you went from the initial one where she labeled you from being in your first action you did as a troublemaker, and you said, hey, if I'm going to be a troublemaker, I'm already called this, I'm going to accept who I am and just go and cause more trouble, up the ante. So that's what you did, and that was your secondary deviance. But what if the teacher had labeled you with a stigma, another stigma? Would you have followed that as well? It depends on the different theories. Some are going to say if she hadn't necessarily labeled you, you still would have went along with your friends and done that. But did the label be your specific guidance in making those next steps to more behavior? So we're going to look at another way that people are defined as deviant. This could be territory defiance. This is where you're going to be redefining what is violent or deviant. So in these situations, it could be where someone is saying your behavior, your actions are deviant. But in fact, if you keep showing that and you get awareness going, what happens is you can redefine it and people see it differently. One of them is with the LGBTQ plus community. They started being more open, creating awareness, and fighting for their rights. So people are seeing them as, several people are not seeing it as deviant behavior anymore, and they're being more supportive of it. While there is some ideas that it is, there is a growing population that isn't. So it's redefining what people call you or your actions as deviant. So that label can change if you can redefine it. Many times with deviance, there's a stereotype. Uh, these can be, for example, people can assume all Muslims are going to be part of 9/11 in the future. They're assuming that anybody that's in poverty are the people that are um, not going to have an education or are going to commit crimes. And they also assume things like if you've done something in the past, maybe you got caught as a teenager with using marijuana, they're assuming that you're going to go on and do hard drugs for the rest of your life. So there's different forms of stereotypes, and I'm going to go through what the text says and give you some more detail with it. So there's the self-fulfilling prophecy. That's the inaccurate statement or belief that by altering the situation it becomes accurate, the prediction that causes itself to come true. Those are the stereotypes, like, for example, I mentioned of if you're in poverty, then they assume you're going to be a criminal. If you've done one thing, they're assuming it's going to go on for the rest of your life. The other stereotype threat, it's a kind of, it's again a self-fulfilling prophecy in which the fear of performing badly. You know, if I am, I think some people mentioned that they have that where there's this expectation if you don't do this or you weren't expected to do, go on and do successful things with college and you are now, then there were some people and there are some people that are putting that stereotype on you and they are assuming with your social group, your culture, that you're not going to do well. So they're going ahead and predicting that based on just who you are with your social groups. So they're expecting negative things from you in the future that are, of course, stereotypes are incorrect. A stereotype promise is a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy in which positive stereotypes can happen. And they're going to lead to some positive outcomes. So maybe there's the positive stereotype that firstborn children are um, more leaders in the family and better at higher education. Well, if we were to find and do some research and that actually was one of the things that we saw, then that could be a positive thing that those firstborn legitimately have better chances at becoming positive outperformers than others. So that's possible. That's not a negative stereotype there. But you will see stereotypes and assumptions. Again, that's not just assumptions, but that's labeling people based on the way they look, where they're from, what their culture is, um, their financial background. You can name it. I don't have one for crime, but I have red hair. So, of course, redheaded people have their stereotypes to go with it. I'm I am older now, so there's assumptions about, once you get to a certain age, you can't do things and people will see you as you're done. Or what again, there's, different assumptions whenever you're going out in the community and you're meeting people And you want to make sure, one, that when you're going to be doing any research, any evaluation, when you're meeting people, don't stereotype. If you end up going on the count with when you're meeting with homeless people in January, don't assume and stereotype them as, oh, they're just another one of the alcoholic people and they're never going to get better. They're just going to fail, we should have expected it. Well, that's not necessarily true. Maybe they came from white collar jobs and a very engaging family, and something happened to them along the way. So, and could things change for them? Absolutely. There are lots of things. There shouldn't be an assumption that things are always going to be in a negative light, or the assumptions that based on people that there's negative light. Same thing, we shouldn't put a labeled stereotype expectation on someone, and then what if they fail? Again, we've set a stereotype promise there. So Irving Goffman talked about, he ended up deciding to talk about any physical or social attributes that devalue a person or a group's identity. These can exclude people from normal interaction, and they're considered less than. Let's use a couple examples here. You get behind the lady with the walker that's elderly and, of course, going very slow in the store. And what do? You want to go around them. And you want to just they become something you don't want to be around. You're there to get your groceries. You think when you get to the car negatively about that person, or there's maybe the way someone acts or looks. There has been a lot of things with people that are Latino or are from Pakistan or India or other groups like that, because the way they look, they're treated differently and they're devalued from the norm based on with social interaction there. So they may be excluded in that situation. One example that people ended up doing a lot many years ago, and of course I see that some now, is passing. So if you're a group that's been stigmatized, and it's usually, this is the way people look. We saw this a lot with people of color, and it's a very unfortunate thing, but people were finding out that they were stuck in a group, they were stigmatized, but then when they started using passing, where they would pass themselves off, people of color pass themselves off as white, they were seeing a dramatic change in the way they were treated, the opportunities they were offered. So that was happening, and then they had to stick with that. The majority of people had to stick with it. Their family members didn't know, and they had to leave that past from behind with their groups of color so that they could pass, or they were trying to live in two different worlds. This can happen with color. It could be if it's, sexuality. It could be maybe with your different religious groups that you're showing. It's that you're presenting a different type of yourself, and so that you can not be stigmatized, which you would, because you don't belong to the norm. There's also in-group orientation. So this is whenever you're stigmatized and you're rejected, again, based on prejudice, and there's new standards that value group identity. Examples could be, there's people are homosexual in a community that's considered deviant, and then they find friends and groups that support them and value them and their openness. So what you'll see there is that group of in-group orientation. You may have felt deviant or being put down and judged all the time, or felt that you were considered less than or not didn't count, but then suddenly, or either suddenly or over time, you find a group. This is the group that will support you, wants to hear about you. They're setting up to make sure that you have almost a support system for you. Now, there is the outsiders. This is according to Howard Becker. These are the people that are labeled deviant and segregated from normal society. This could be the immigrants, those that don't look like us or speak English. And so I have been in stores and seen people that, again, start looking badly at someone that maybe comes up and asks a question that's not in English, or someone that doesn't have the hearing abilities. They look down upon them because, again, they're not considered normal part of the society, and they're segregated away from everyone because of that. You can be in a rural town and you can come in with your family and either speaking a different language and you could be excluded, or maybe, for example, you're in a rural southern mountain town and you bring someone from New York City and they speak differently and come there. There could be some looks, some exclusion, some talk. Maybe your family looks at them differently if you're from that mountain town. So again, there is definitely going to be where the inside, there's the outsiders. Remember, we talked about that before. There are people that the dominating group will exclude them. So I think some of you talked about moving to the South, and of course the people in the South are the dominating group, and you did feel some exclusion, and because you were coming from up north, and so this could be an example of that situation. The last one is deviance avow. This is the process which an individual identifies as deviant. So this could be, and they initiate their own labeling process. Think of Alcoholics Anonymous. So Alcoholics Anonymous, these people have admitted that they were alcoholics. They admit that they struggle with it. It's going to be an ongoing struggle. And they are going to meetings and they're checking in with sponsors and they're admitting this to others. They actually have to go through and do steps to admit they're alcoholics. And they are not afraid to tell you that because that's something they have to say, I am an alcoholic. And so in that process, they've self-labeled themselves. And that way they can identify at it. So they will always identify as, I'm an alcoholic, this is considered deviant in this society. But then with Alcoholics Anonymous was the way that they were taught to identify it. As defined by our materials, crime is a violation of the norms that's been codified into law. So if you go and look at the legal books, there are many laws and many rules. Some are still in the books that are outdated, but there are many that are used to this day. And so that's a great source when you're trying to determine what is a crime, especially when you're studying your sociology that relates to a crime. It's very important to go and look at the details when you're doing your research as what is defined as a crime. Is it considered violent crime? Then you want to look at what's defined in that area versus other forms of crime. So criminology, we work a lot with those in criminology, and they have the systematic system of studying crime, criminals, criminal justice. Sociologists will often work directly with them, or we'll get some of our research from them as well. You're going to see in a minute, one of the ways that we get some of our information is we go to the reports, and these are compiled There's, for example, the Uniform Crime Report that measures the United States, and that gives us sort of a tabulation of crime that's reported. The North Carolina statistics to bring it home a little bit more. There is the North Carolina statistics site and crime laws. You can look at those through your North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation and the North Carolina Justice Portal if you're looking at trying to figure out some statistics that are related to crime in North Carolina. Just an example of this, so you can get the idea of crime and how we could take this and looking at if we had our theory or hypothesis and we're going to come up with some research, you could go to one of these sites and pull up. So I went to the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation and pulled for 2024. And I looked at violent crime arrests, and they did define what violent crime arrests were, what was considered violent crime. So what they said was among ages 18 and under with violent crime arrest, they've seen a 10% increase in 2024, which to me that was pretty surprising that we've had an increase in the violent crime in North Carolina for those that are younger. So just to go over a couple of things I just talked about, there are different types of crime. There is violent crime. These, again, are defined by your area, so do check either nationally, state, locally to make sure the definitions fall into that. If you have a specific law that you're looking into, you can research. If you don't see it, you can always contact one of those services. But let's look at it this way. Violent crime. This is a crime that is where there's murder, rape, aggravated assault, robbery. You're going to see that a lot of listed when you look up violent crime, especially when you're looking up statistics. So when you're defining, if you're looking at theory or hypothesis and you're looking at the word crime, remember to define your type of crime and not only say violent crime, but then define what that means as well. There's also property crime. So property crime, this is not going to be any violence. So you're not going to have any assault with it. This is simply burglary, a larceny or theft, motor vehicle theft, and arson. So if someone is killed or assaulted, that would not fall under the property crime, even if it was during a burglary. The burglary can be added in addition to the assault. If there was an assault during a burglary, that would be two different crimes being committed. Cybercrime, I just mentioned about how there can be cyberbullying, there can be things such as identity theft and embezzlement and sexual predation, and there's a lot of scams out there. Like there's the the Tender documentary that's out there. That's even an example of some of those online crimes that are out there. There's also white collar crime. A lot of people are like, what exactly is white collar crime? This is usually done by people that are considered at a higher level, and they have an occupation usually that's relatable to it. So it could be something as tax evasion, sharing confidential information that could lead to financial gain, such as with upcoming stocks that are not allowed to be shared. So things like that, those typically fall under white collar crime, and you're going to see there's different penalties for each of these with violent crime and property crime and cyber crime and white collar crime. There's all these different penalties for it, and they are all coded, and you can look year for year at all the materials and look up statistics. And not only can you look at US, you can look at your state, you can look at your county, you can look at your town or city. Now, there are different forms of crime deterrence. This is been decided by different areas. Remember, again, when we're looking at what's considered deviant or a crime, it could be based on your country, your culture. your state, your town. Remember, this is how determined by the deviants decided in those areas. So the deterrence of the crime deterrence can be very different, as well as the deviance definition in different areas and different cultures. So some of the deterrence is that is an approach to punishment that can be, there are threats to penalties. These could be such as jail time. This could be fines. This could be anything that can discourage people from committing crimes. And then there are the retribution. This is a form of punishment that emphasizes retaliation or revenge for the crime, is the ultimate goal there. So what could be considered retaliation or revenge? Well, let's say that someone goes and, attacks, maybe attacks your sister, and they ended up, the community learned about it, and you did too. And your way of retribution was going back and punishing them. Either you're stabbing them, shooting them, finding another way to punish them. Your form is trying to make sure that they know that they've done something wrong, and you're taking it often in your own hands. So that's a form of retribution. The other one is incapacitation. Um, this protects society from criminals by imprisoning them or executing them. So, of course, in the US, we have prisons. In these, they can be private, they can be federal, they can be state. We can have local jails. So those are different form of imprisonments in other countries. They have those as well. The punishments that are in those prisons can vary. Isolation can occur. You can be with the general population. In other countries, there can be different forms of torture that are there. So that's a form of those. Execution has been something that was done a lot many years ago. It's been slowly eliminated, and you see it in just a few of the states. It is not as common as it once was. Now there's rehabilitation. So they're saying an approach to punishment that they're trying to reform people as part of their penalty. So, I'm a criminal. I have done horrible things. So one of the ways, instead of just putting me in jail and letting me sit there, is to reform my behavior. So maybe I have done a lot of burglaries and assaults. So one of the things they want to teach me is help me get my college education, teaching me some life skills, getting me involved in the community. Some of these could be where they have the dogs that come in and they have them do part of the dog training for them to be assistant dogs for people that need them in the future. So they're trying to find new ways to help rehab them. There are even special programs for whenever someone gets out of prison, jail, whatever it may be, and they have services there directly for when people come out, because what they're saying is you open the doors and you leave doesn't mean that everything's better for that person. So their goal is to help reform them so they don't return back to prison in the future. There's the criminal justice system, of course, and that's the group that's going to collect all the information. They are the ones that are helping do the litigation. They're the ones that run the prisons and the courts, and they're enforcing all the laws. So again, that can be your FBI or SBI, your sheriff, your police. That could be your legal system. So if you're going to the courthouse, that's part of the criminal justice system. Your lawyers, that are provided, your also the police officers, the detectives, all of those people are involved in what's the criminal justice system. And yes, as sociologists, we get involved in that as well and find out information and also can share. And lastly is that capital punishment. I mentioned it a little bit in incapacitation, where we mentioned that can be imprisoning or executing them. The execution is capital punishment, which is the death penalty. We don't have as much of that going on as we once did. There were different forms of capital punishment. There used to be firing squads, lethal injections, electrocution, hangings. There can be different systems in different countries. So that is, if you ever want to look into that, there's a lot of research on capital punishment and theories. There's a lot with rehabilitation as a huge one that you can look at and find out what they're doing as far as if someone has attempted to be part of a lot of rehabilitation systems that are out there. How often are they repeat offenders? And so you can look at that and see if there's any success. I've looked at that specifically with grants to see when someone's applying and they've applied and they have a rehabilitation program, has their program been success? So I look at what the people in their program are doing. Have they returned? Are we seeing success there? And we're looking at as well as not just in that program, but beyond that. So in 1960, in Greensboro, North Carolina, there was the lunch counter at Woolworth's. And some young black gentlemen decided to sit at the counter, which was not allowed in North Carolina, Greensboro, at Woolworth's, and in most towns, cities, states, it was against the law and considered deviant. That was 1960. During that, they were had food poured on top of them. They were yelled at. They had people crowding around them, but they sat there peacefully. It was planned. They had their books ready to sit there and just read. They sat there as long as they could, and then, of course, police were there as well. Let's give you another part of that timeline, just so you know how long this is going on. This was, you already had Brown versus education. You already had people starting to speak out for civil rights. Then you had Martin Luther King speak I Have a Dream, 1963. But then they start talking about civil rights at a federal level and trying to get the 14th Amendment taken care of for equal protection of rights. But after all that, 1963, many people think, oh, we're done, we have civil rights. Now, there was still people that were going through a lot when they were still fighting as a group, peacefully marching, 1965. They were in Selma. If you've not read about that, that's a huge deal. So Selma, they did the march, and with all of these protests, with marches, with freedom buses, they had some brutality from just the common people around the population. They would line up and attack them, the protesters. They were jailed. They were physically harmed. And through all of that, these people were still fighting for the rights, not just for themselves, but for others and for the future of others. At the time, many people thought of them as deviant. But the fact is, because of what people consider deviant, we've had them become such heroic, make such great changes in this country. So you can look at that, and that's called positive deviance. I do want to recommend, if you've never been to the Civil Rights Museum in Greensboro, North Carolina, they actually have it where the Woolworths was. I recommend you go there. Not only do you learn about the lunch counter event, but you also will see and learn so much about the civil rights movement there. And I've been to it and I highly recommend it. So deviance is defined in many different ways. What's considered deviant maybe in Charlotte or in my neighborhood, it could be very different than what's even down the street or let's say in China. We're going to see different definitions of deviance for those people, what they define as deviance. If deviance could be, I'm not going to wear my school uniform, or deviance could be, I'm going to go rob the bank. Um, it can be so extreme to where we talked about women going out um, after it gets dark by themselves, and in cultures that's considered very deviant, bad behavior, and impacts not only them but their family. So we can have different forms of deviance. There's different consequences of what people define as deviance within their own culture. Again, they can be ostracized. They can lose jobs. They can not get jobs. They can be put in jail, prison, execution. There can be harm to them. There's so many different ways that people have done that. There have been ways to have less recidivism, like try to keep them from returning to imprisonment. So there have been efforts to do that. That would be a great option for you guys to look at recidivism rates. It's also great to look at what crimes are going on in your area and has it increased or decreased. So there's so many opportunities for you here with statistics, looking at stereotyping, looking at some of the past of what's happened. And I strongly encourage you to dive deeper on this beyond your books and your materials here. We have such a wealth of information, and I encourage you to do so. Reminder, you need to complete all your assignments by 11:59 p.m. on Sunday. I know you have lots of chapters we're going through, and it's just a short period of time that we have, and I want to make sure you are accomplishing all this. If you get behind, it'll snowball on you, and I just don't have the opportunity where I can give you extra time unless there's an extreme emergency like a death in the family. So in those cases, it's still at least to try to do something as much as you can so you can be counted attending, because your attendance is based on if you turned anything in on that Sunday at 11:59 p.m. If you didn't, then it's going to have to be, you would be considered absent. I still will try to work with you. I encourage questions. That's what sociology is about, asking questions. So I encourage you to ask questions. Email me. We can do a Teams online meeting, but I will reply within 48 hours. Your assignments, please turn them in, and I will grade them within 1 week. Hopefully we'll get to them sooner. We do have a large class. And I look forward to hearing from you and getting comments, questions, and reading your materials. See you soon.